I would say the number one thing is know what you're signing up for. So a lot of people think I can make so much money if I work for myself. Well, that is going to take a couple years.
Welcome to Venture Unscripted, a podcast where we talk with founders and entrepreneurs about their journey from 0 to 1. Welcome to this edition of our podcast, where I've got Alysha Lach White with me from Little Space Studio. She's the CEO and founder. So welcome, Alysha.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about, I would love for you to introduce yourself, Alysha. Tell us a little bit about you, and then a little bit about Little Space Studio and what you got going on there.
Awesome. So my name is Alysha Lach White. I'm the founder and CEO of Little Space Studio. Little Space Studio is a co-working space, or at least it started out as a co-working space. It's venturing into more experimental waters now. And for those of you who don't know, a co-working space is a shared workspace, a model that has been around for a couple decades, but now has just been getting traction for a lot of different reasons. One is the Netflix special WeWork, or the there's a We Fail, or I don't know what it's called.
Yes.
But basically documenting WeWork. There's which is a global co-working brand. And then also because of the pandemic, it's really shown a highlight on the need for in-person relations when it comes to freelancing and remote working. So it's membership-based. People buy membership, and they are able to share an office space with other individuals and also often teams when they often don't have their own suites or private workspaces.
Awesome. So how is your space? I think a lot of our listeners, I know myself, I've worked out of Start Garden in Grand Rapids and some other co-working spaces. How is your space different? Because I know you've got a focus. You've got a kind of a focal point that makes it a little bit different and unique.
Absolutely. So ours is unique in the sense that we provide our space for creative professionals. That was our original target market. We've expanded since then to freelancers of all types, and really making the space cozy for anyone who does remote working or run their own business entity. A lot of spaces, like there's actually two major ones in Grand Rapids, the Factory, which is a really awesome the original, actually, co-working space in Grand Rapids. They've been around for over 10 years, and they have a really loyal following. And they tend to have a lot of tech-focused groups, marketing, small business groups. Start Garden, I'm glad you mentioned them. They are very focused on startups. So they are very focused on on getting small businesses off the ground, but also getting them into the verticals that startups need. Mm-hmm. Our space, we're really focused on the individual. So yes, there is some focus on supporting small businesses as you grow your team, et cetera, et cetera. But we are really focused on freelancers and individual workers. And that's a bit from my personal experience. I've spent about 12 years now doing illustration and concept design work, and I have never had a full-time job. I still am learning about full-time jobs, even as a CEO. Right? So I have had a very non-traditional path into building a business entity for my own, in that sense. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of what makes us different, is that creating a space for creatives and freelancers, there's just a lot of extra little things that they're always looking for, whether it's extra dongles in the space, people to talk about taxes and budgeting, project management. A lot of these things bring up dozens of questions that it's really difficult for an individual to solve on their own, and you can only watch so many YouTube videos without someone actually responding to your questions, right? So creating an inclusive environment where people feel comfortable asking each other questions, bartering and trading for services, that happens a ton in the space. We try to really have an invitation for all of that.
Buy a co-working space. I mean, I've personally seen the benefit of going into co-working spaces, but maybe you can help those that haven't experienced that. Why would someone do that?
Oh, absolutely. So I'll go off the cuff with the two major reasons a lot of our members come in. One of them is to combat distractions. So some people are, it's okay, I'll just put it this way. It's a privilege to have a home office. My husband and I are empty nesters, so we have a couple extra rooms in the house. We can create a home office experience, and my husband actually runs his own company too. So that is a benefit. You know, it's easier to do now, but there's so many people who do not have a home office, but they still have to work remote, sometimes 100% remote. So when you are battling laundry, kids, animals running around in the house and stuff, it's just sometimes you just want to get away from that to really be more productive, to get away from those distractions, and you're just like, can I just go to a clean space, right? And some people will say, well, that's a coffee shop, right? And the thing is with a coffee shop is that there's this unspoken rule. It's like you buy a drink, you get Wi-Fi, awesome. You have people all over you, and you have a tiny space. And as soon as you leave the space, you know, you're wondering if people are going to take your stuff. So it's like there's a bit of a balance that or limitations is a better way to put it when it comes to a coffee shop. So you think of the step up of that is just coming into a clean space, just like at similar office spaces you would have seen, and you can just drop into any desk and you can just get your work done. We have complimentary coffee, tea, and Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is necessary, 100%. But I meant to say snacks. Tons of snacks. I'm a huge proponent of people being fed to be productive, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's huge. Yeah. So that is one major reason, right? Is that you can eliminate distractions, come to a clean space, and just sit down, and all you have to focus on is work. And then the other major reason is loneliness. To combat loneliness, when you're working up by yourself, we've talked to so many folks, and sometimes we're the only people that they see. So we have members that live on their own. They live with roommates or whatever the situation is, and they're doing 40 hours a week minimum. They're doing programming, they're doing marketing, they're project managing, whatever they're doing. It is a very, very lonely experience to only be on Zoom calls all day. And it's like I saw just a very interesting shift when COVID hit and everybody's working remote, and we're like, yeah, everybody's super optimistic about it. And we're like, we're going to make this work. It's going to be great. We're going to make it as human, as holistic as possible. It's going to feel like you're sitting next to me, and it really doesn't. You know, like, there's some remote workers who've been working remote long time before COVID hit. And they'll say, like, yeah, you can get some off-the-cuff conversation or some of those, like, human moments, but you can't really get it if you're casually running into people in the hallway, like in an office space, right? And that's where you get some really meaningful connections, or at a mixer or a happy hour or something. So that is a huge benefit that a lot of our members find is, one, they're surrounded by people who are like-minded in the sense as they want the space to be inclusive for them and for other people. And then two, they are looking for that spontaneous connectivity that you get when you're in a group of people, like in person.
Yes.
So there is some huge benefits that come with that. And like I said, for some people, it's the only human interaction they really get to have besides going to the grocery store or something else. So.
Yeah, and I think the loneliness part really speaks to the part you spoke before about with community. I think that's kind of what you're referring to, is like you're creating a community. And I love what you had said of, in a virtual world, you can somewhat create that community by having conversations here and there. But I've always heard the phrase of, like, a culture or community happens in the in-between times, where it's when you're walking to a meeting, or you're sitting by someone, or you're overhearing someone, or you go to lunch, and so I think that's kind of what you're trying to get at, is like you're also creating that community that, so people aren't lonely and they can have real human connections with other people. So that's awesome.
You got it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I would love to get into what's fascinating is I would have to imagine, if you know what co-working spaces are. I don't know about you. I'm a very entrepreneurial person. I think you're very entrepreneurial. So but for me, I've always thought, it would be kind of cool to start a co-working space. And then you hear stories and you're like, wow, that's really hard to start a co-working space. And so I would love to hear, and I think that maybe there's some listeners out there that think the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, I would love to start a co-working space. I would love to hear the origin story of like, how did that happen? And I know some of it, you and I talked prior, there's a lot of COVID also wrapped in this story, which makes it really interesting and also, interesting to hear. I'll say that.
Something that people don't think about a lot when it comes to co-working spaces or shared workspaces is that the business model is so important. You have to get it right. You have to get that price point right. And then you have to, and this is after years of learning too, right? Just teaching myself how to be a boss. You have to get the price point right, but you have to understand like who you're serving, what community you want to build, because there's so many different ways to make money off of that besides memberships. And a lot of people going into it saying, oh, if I just get 12 people, that's 12 memberships at this price point. And that's the thing is like that business model caps at a certain point. Yeah. And your capacity hits, and then where's the growth, right?
Yeah.
So the growth, you have to get really creative when it comes to growth. Little Space has a business model that's threefold. We have our co-working memberships. We have our rentals. So we rent out conference rooms, meeting rooms, and also event spaces. And then also we're expanding into the workshop space. We've done some beta testing with this, and we have a good idea of how to build some more solid workshop models. The space will not survive without those other arms, at least the way that I built it. So when I go in the origin story, a lot of my focus on workshops is this path to innovating it in a way where it works in a co-working model. And it was just a trip. And also a huge misconception that I want you to keep in mind is I hear this a ton, and I've heard this from other failed co-working spaces, is that someone will say, well, I am a web developer and I work 20 hours a week web developing. This is such a great business opportunity because from a real estate perspective, I can rent space to my own business and then share with a couple other people, and then it's a co-working space. It's good. Well, you don't take into account membership management, taking out the trash, maintenance, snacks, programming. Like you are signing up for a full-time job. So there's probably some lean ways that you can do a collective model, get a couple people together and rent out a suite, but that's not necessarily the co-working experience that I'm talking about. Yeah. We have a membership of about 90 folks right now, and that's a lot of management, and it's also a lot of personal touch to make sure that all of those members feel like they're welcome and included, and then also that their needs are being addressed. So that's something I want you to just kind of keep in mind as I jump into the origin story, is that a lot of people will hear this and be like, man, that's so much fun, I'm going to do this. And I'm like, you're literally opening up an office. And so there's a lot of logistics.
It's a lot more work.
Yes, it is a ton of work. So like I said, I was a freelancer for many years. I continue to be. The CEO title kind of takes up a lot of my time right now, but I was freelancing and I was splitting a space very similarly to what I discussed with a couple other artist friends. And so they were mostly fine artists and makers in different capacities. And so we were renting out this 700 square foot space, and then one by one they each had to leave. So, we're all splitting the rent. It was fine. I was a very normal person right here. Like I didn't have any aspirations to start a business larger than my own. I was just going to be a freelancer. But as they left, I started bringing some folks in because I was already pretty involved in some community arts work. And I was learning about the disparities for creative entrepreneurs and what they needed for their business practice, for their career development. I had no concept of how, for example, an artist build a retirement for themselves. The answer is most of them don't. Most of them just like, that's a decision they make. They're like, I'm going to be an artist, and if it pays off, awesome. If not, I'll just paint till I die, but it's still a rewarding experience, right? So
Yep.
I was initially focused on, because of my illustration background, artists, community arts, how to empower them, how to help them understand business models more. I had a couple friends at the time that were doing some really amazing research in that space. And so I started experimenting with the space as it emptied out. So I started bringing in different stations, and I started just doing what we would call now like very, very loose user research. And so what I learned was a lot of people loved the space as a potential workshop space. So they liked the idea that they could go to a space, make a mess, do a photo shoot, and then leave. And then they don't have to maintain it. They don't have to clean the floor. They don't have to lock the doors or anything like that. So they liked that concept. I experimented with that a little bit. I call this the alpha, right? A little bit of a rental here and there. I had a disco party. I had a couple photo shoots and just trying stuff out. People got a little confused by it, and then they also expressed in so many ways that they just didn't want to be alone in someone else's room. So that was a really incredible insight, because I was so focused on this box, like this workshop space that I could just activate into any different way. And then I kept getting this feedback, is this, if you know the meme, like Forever Alone?
Yes.
It's so many people said, I feel forever alone here. I could just go home and feel alone. So it's like, I love what you're doing, but I would much rather have an opportunity to meet other creatives and feel supported in my craft. And then I said, okay. And then I had actually worked at a couple co-working spaces, was familiar with the model, and it just kind of clicked. It's like, we need a co-working model for creatives. And upon further research, I wasn't the first one to think of this, but definitely one of the first in the West Michigan area that wanted to be a little more ambitious than making a smaller collective. I wanted something that was really easy to get a membership, day pass, or even just a rental of a space, and just like get it and go.
Yeah. So you first started out. That's really cool, because you first started. Yeah. I like how you did that. You first started almost testing in a very much a smaller space that you were renting for yourself, and it was like, how can I use this space? Share it with some other folks first, and then get some feedback and just try different things as you're almost playing around with that different space to see what works, what doesn't, and then you kind of sounds like the next step, you kind of took a leap of faith and said, well, let's see if we can make this bigger. And that's the next chapter. Is that right?
That's what I would say is chapter 2 is a whole other chunk of our journey, is actually trying to launch the damn thing, because we were supposed to launch a soft launch in June 2020. And so, as you know, everything was shut down at that point.
Yes.
So we were in the middle of a renovation. We lost investment perspectives, like everything just kind of went to a halt, and we really struggled to figure out what to do. And my fella and I, who've been like investing solely in this up to this point, we're just like, you know what, screw it, let's just keep going, because if our research is right, this is gonna be popping after COVID. This is gonna be needed. Yeah, if we're doing it right. Yeah.
Wow. I can't imagine what the stress and the amount of blood, sweat, and tears had to go into that year of COVID. I mean, because that had to have been a pretty stressful year of like kicking off things with one of the craziest times for any kind of in-person activities, when it's basically that's what a co-working space is. People find it surprising when I say that 2020 was not the hardest year. The hardest year was 2021. That was the hardest year, because that's when investors really pulled back,
kept stuff close to their chest. I'm talking about mostly like the West Michigan based investment fields.
Yep.
I imagine that other places are like, we've been through it, it's fine. But
Yes.
I don't know. I only know from my experiences entertaining investors in our area that it was a very, very, very tough sell. Because imagine you're going around and you're like, we need expansion capital. We need to, like, we basically, I paid for the proof of concept, which was insane. Like we got into so much debt. Keeping it alive, I laid off one person, which was the best choice. But then I kept everybody else employed. So even when we had no income coming in, I was just like, let's pivot, let's build, let's keep, like, this is an opportunity to innovate and research. So let's figure it out. And we came up with some really awesome solutions because we were able to go heads down. And I basically just paid for really expensive research at that time, but it was still good. It was still good because we learned a ton in that process. But then, oh my goodness, 2021.
Yeah.
It was insane because like people started going out more and it was fine. But then like the up and down with Delta and Omicron just was insane because people were just waiting for this on switch for event venues, for public gatherings. And we weathered it the best we could. But as I said, membership does not pay all of our bills. It pays a nice chunk, but we were able to acquire during 2020 some incredible tenants. Like we were able to fill most of our suites. And then we were able to, there was a couple tech companies that downsized. And so they were really excited to join the space, and they were all very comfortable wearing face masks, and they were very comfortable with how we kept the space safe. So we started out probably with a good like 30 to 40 members and grew into about 60 by the end of 2020, which is incredible.
That is.
And so, or actually I misspoke. We grew to 60 at the end of 2021, despite it being up and down and crazy.
Yes.
I mean, we would build whole event campaigns and then have to cancel all of it multiple times. Man. And I did literally everything I could to just keep the doors open with my own personal finances. So
wow.
I
Hard
took
years.
side gigs. I took side gigs just to keep literally the business cash flow going.
Yes.
It was pretty insane. And yes, you're absolutely right. It was very, very painful. I also really learned a lot about myself in that process, and I learned about what I could handle. Turns out I can handle quite a bit. And
sounds
it was like this, I'm just going off on a tangent now about burnout, but it was like I burn out every couple weeks and I hit this horrible wall, and then I just dust myself off. I'm like, okay, well, that happened and I survived it, so let's get back going. Let's get back to it. Yeah.
Yes. And it probably helped that you I always say to people, like, it kind of makes you stronger in the fact that you look back and you can then go, well, if I survive that, I could probably survive this. And it's like, I survived that, now I can probably survive this. Yeah, so that's super helpful. I mean, you don't want to do that, but that's sometimes how you grow. So I think all entrepreneurs resonate with that.
Yeah, it sounds very simple saying it out loud, but I am equally as impacted when I hear another entrepreneur say it. Yeah. And I hear another entrepreneur saying, you do not want to know my credit score right now. And it's like, we pay our bills. Like we are law-abiding citizens who are paying our bills. But we do have good credit scores because we have high debt ratios. Yes.
And take the risk.
That's just a reality of it.
Yes.
We keep maxing out those credit lines because if a printer breaks, or what are you gonna do?
Yes, exactly.
And then you're already in this cycle. I have a lot of opinions about financial literacy and knowledge whenever you want to get into that. But I will just say right now that is like just understanding how to navigate credit. I know that I made a lot of mistakes, but I am damn proud of myself that I made it this far and not just like things not going to shit.
Like everyone only sees the tip of the iceberg when they look at an entrepreneur. Like they look at your studio and they're like, oh wow, you got 90 members and you're doing really well and you're opening up a new location in Zealand, which I'd love to talk about, and opening up a new location. You're doing awesome, and what they don't know is the rest of your story, which is the huge amount under the water line, right? Of like that iceberg. It's like the pain that you had to go through and endured is amazing to me. And I'd imagine to the listeners too, of going through COVID as a co-working space, I can't imagine. So, but yeah, tell me a little bit more. I think we'd love to learn what's next for you guys, so what's next?
Vision is that we get anywhere between 3 to 5 locations in West Michigan that would actually connect creative communities together. So that is the big vision I have. And when I talk big vision too, entrepreneurs understand this is like, that's where you get into the little crazy space. Yeah. Where you're actually putting things together that people are not going to understand for years.
That's right.
So when I start talking about the Zealand location, we are not making profit yet. We are very, very close. But we have been functioning on such a lean cash flow for so long that we are still acquiring some of our basic necessities still, because this was a very lean launch. So people think that I'm crazy expanding into a second location. I'm like, you know what? I actually talked to 2 other co-working brands who have added new locations, and they're not even cash positive. They're just doing it because you have to get on it now. It's like you have this itch and you have this understanding. The data is showing you this is what's going to happen in a couple years. And in a couple years, people are going to have the investors, and they're going to have the followings to create their own spaces. And that opportunity that you could have had is kind of left in the dust. And so we are taking a huge risk, but at the same time, we are just chasing that opportunity. And that's what separates some entrepreneurs from probably the safer entrepreneurs, is that the few of us are like a little extra crazy. We're like, we're just going to do this because we're very well informed, we're very well researched, and we're very well supported community wise. So just keep your head on, make smart decisions, and do it. And so that's kind of what we're doing in Zealand. Zealand is such a cute, very welcoming community between Grand Rapids and Holland. And being so close to Holland is awesome, being so close to the lakeshore communities. But then also you're 25, 30 minutes away from Grand Rapids. So our members are so excited actually about this opening because it's so close to them, like within a half hour for most of them. And they could also utilize both locations. They don't have to pay an extra fee. Their membership actually transfers. So if they have clients on the lakeshore, they can meet at our space, go to the beach afterwards. There's been a couple people like visiting touristy things after work because they've never been to the lakeshore. So I'm really passionate ultimately about connecting West Michigan very holistically. We tend to have our own little bubbles. If you were born and raised in Grand Rapids, you know what the Grand Rapids bubbles are. And if you are not from Grand Rapids, you definitely know what those business bubbles are.
Yep.
And so we really want to break those wide open and make sure that anyone coming to the area, and when I say coming, I mean transplants, that's a huge focus for us, is there's tons of people moving to West Michigan. So where are they going to land? How are they going to get involved in our communities? We don't want them to be satellites. We want them to come in. We want them to be part of our communities that we've built here. So that's our huge play right there.
So what would you say, I mean, for the listeners out there that are trying to, entrepreneurs starting their own venture on their own startup, what are some biggest takeaways or learnings that you can say, I've learned this, and I think I would love to give this as some parting advice or learnings you've learned to apply to their own business?
I would say the number one thing is know what you're signing up for. So a lot of people think I can make so much money if I work for myself. Well, that is going to take a couple years. Like it is, depending on, I mean, if you're going into business for yourself and you're freelancing, it's a lot safer these days to start freelancing. I mean, freelancing went up 30%. And it's almost half of the U.S. workforce now is people who are contractors or freelancers or people who work for themselves, aka W-9 employee, whatever that looks like, right? That's becoming a safer bet. But if you actually want to start a business where you are going to be eventually taking on employees, that is such a responsibility that you have to be ready to accept that responsibility and know that you have to show up no matter what. And I learned so much about myself, and there were so many times where I thought I could not do this. So many times, so many blood, sweat, and tears, absolutely real, where it's a gross combination of imposter syndrome and feeling inadequate because you maybe weren't educated the right way. Well, the reality is that entrepreneurs are often not educated. Like, entrepreneurs often don't go to business school, for example, right? Yeah. Like we learn these things as we go. And so even now, this is probably the 5th year of Little Space as an entity functioning in some way. I went from just the 700 square foot space to now having 6 employees and managing payroll and building out financial forecasting. I would never had imagined that I could do any of this. I just literally told myself that I could, and then I told myself I have to, because it can't survive if I don't. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's my biggest thing, is know what you're signing up for. It is going to be excruciatingly hard. It is going to be a sacrifice. You are literally deciding between having lots of family time or literally taking care of other people's families. That's how I see it. I will say also the greatest privilege of being a business owner is having staff. I never would have known the pure joy of being able to provide employment. And it's so funny because you hear financial advisors and you hear people in business talk about, oh, we have to hire another employee, it's more expenses. I'm like, that's a human being. For me, people who choose to work for me, that is such a privilege. It is a privilege that I will defend until the end of this, that I'm just so happy that I get to provide jobs to the community and to people that I genuinely care about. So that is something that it is a huge responsibility, but at the same time, there's a lot of reward in it.
Very cool. Cool. Sounds like great things ahead. Thanks for spending some time and talk to me about your business. It's really fascinating. I'm excited about your growth trajectory.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on and creating this platform for Chill Talk. It's super important.